Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. Today I'm going to do my July wrap up. I feel like I had quite a... gosh, what happened in July? Yeah, I've been having quite a topsy-turvy kind of time, and I think it took me quite a long time in July to actually read, but then I've slowly gotten more back into it, and that's partially because of various stressful things, and then finally finding out about some of those stressful things, and maybe having a bit of more of stability now, or about what's going to happen in the future, although it's obviously still pretty stressful. But the first book that I read was The Lie Tree by Frances Harding? I think it's Harding actually, but I can't remember. And this is another of the kind of booktube love 2016 books, a bit like The Grace Keepers, and it's been on my TBR for ages, and yeah, I finally read it. So it is a sort of YA book, and it's about Faith, who is the child of a scientific priest, religious man, pastor, vicar, I can't remember what he's called, and it's kind of set in a Victorian era, so it's sort of historical fiction, and it's about her pursuit for knowledge, her uncomfortable positioning between child and woman, her coming to terms with her father potentially not being as great as she sort of imagines him to be. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very good. There's some stuff about imbibing hallucinogenic fruit, which I loved, and obviously it's very meaningful in terms of the lie tree, and she's called Faith. It's about, you know, the potential destruction of human psychology, I guess, womanhood, and also, yeah, so it's also kind of thinking about Darwinism and natural science and the development of that, especially in the context of all of these religious men who first got into it, and then either they sort of build up a wall against scientific knowledge, or they sort of lose some of their faith. Yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was enjoyable. I definitely feel like I had more things to say, but no, I don't. It's also kind of a whole mix of sort of a bit of a mystery, a little bit of a like I said, it's historical fantasy. It's also kind of coming of age in some capacity, and yeah, I don't know, it feels quite subtle. It is quite a long book, I guess, for it's 400 pages. Not particularly big for a historical fantasy book, I guess, but yeah, I would recommend it, although I feel like everybody has read it. The next book I read was Our Wives Under the Sea by Julie Arnfield. This was one of the books that I've been excited to read ever since I heard about it. I've read Julie Arnfield's short story collection Salt Slow, and I really enjoyed quite a lot of that. Obviously it's a short story collection, so you're never going to enjoy everything, but yeah, I really enjoyed that. I was really looking forward to this. You know, I know that it's queer or lesbian, and you know, it's about the sea, and it's a horror book, and I don't normally read horror books, but the other stuff sounded very up my street, and I guess I was just kind of a bit disappointed in it. You know, I mean, partially I think it's because most people I know have really loved it and have said it's one of their favourite books of the year, so I just had really high expectations. I think it's also that horror books don't necessarily work for me. Basically, well, I don't read horror, and one of the reasons is because I live quite a horror life. I know there are some things that if I read about in a book, they would be really scary to me, but they would be so scary for me because they would really, really upset me that it wouldn't be a fun kind of I'm reading a horror book kind of vibe. It would be just a now I'm gonna further not go to sleep, and if I do have awful nightmares, that kind of thing. But then for example in here, some of the stuff that's sort of body horror-y or is supposed to be creepy is that Leia, one of the main characters, her body is changing after she went on this sea expedition, and her wife Miri is narrating what's happening now, and she's come back, and yeah, what's happening to her body, and what's happening to her body is strange and confusing and painful, and obviously I don't experience the things that she does in this novel, but I do live in a world where strange, confusing and painful things happen to my body all the time. You know, the other day I had a whole bunch of pain in my knee, and I didn't know why, and it was really very, very painful, and then it just kind of went away after 2 days, and I didn't do anything to make it happen, to make it there, and I also didn't do anything to make it go away, you know, and that makes me feel crazy, but that's also just my normal. So I think some of that body horror element of oh my god, what is happening to my body, just doesn't scare me, because yeah, it's my reality. So I guess in that respect it didn't quite work. I thought it was going to be more horror and you know, that delicious feeling where you're scared. I thought I was going to get that from this, I didn't. But I did really love the relationship between Leia and Miri. They are married, and we sort of get to learn about their relationship retroactively, kind of, because it's so different now that Leia has come back from the sea. And we also do get layers. We get her perspective too of what was going on the research trip that she went on, because she's like a marine biologist. Yeah, there's also like an octopus in here called Pamela, who's obviously my favourite character. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't not recommend this. I just think that maybe people should temper their expectations. But yeah, there's that. Then I did read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen for Jane Austen July, which is great. I'm really happy I read it. It was very enjoyable. Yeah, so this was her first published novel, and I definitely felt like I could tell. It's kind of funny that I like left this to read last, because it does feel quite like it feels very real, but it also does still feel kind of a bit more caricaturist than like Pride and Prejudice or Persuasion, and you know, more of like a sort of romp than the other novels, aside from Northanger Abbey. But that feels very different, even though it is also caricaturish, but that's because this one feels much less of a satire in that sense, whereas Northanger Abbey feels much more self-consciously as a satire, if that makes sense. I feel like I really didn't express that well. What I mean is that Northanger Abbey is much more self-consciously a parody of Gothic novels, whereas this is more like, well, it is still like a sort of satire on some social relations. It isn't as directed a book. It's more kind of like playing around with a bunch of characters and scenarios, rather than having like this very particular goal of like, I am going to parody Gothic novels and misogyny, which is Northanger Abbey. I loved it. I also got Mari to watch the film with Emma Thompson in with me after I'd finished it, which was also nice, and like it all held up really well, and it feels like a very like summery book, and it just, yeah, I really enjoyed reading it, and it was pretty easy to read, which was also very nice. The next book I read was Karanasi. I feel like I read quite a lot of like different time zoned books this month. Is that true? Kind of, not really. More recent releases, I guess. But this is Karanasi by Susanna. I guess like I went into this thinking that it would be very confusing. I didn't find it confusing at all. Like, whilst the protagonist, Karanasi, he's confused, especially because he kind of finds out that like he's maybe missing a bunch of his memories. I was personally never confused, because like I don't expect to know everything going into reading a book. And I feel like sometimes people, like, this is also like quite like a dark academia-y book in a kind of like different, from a very different perspective, which is nice. I enjoyed that. I don't know, like people are much more interested, it seems, to be like reading about people who find knowledge, rather than like having to read books where you have to like be a proactive reader about comprehending it, if that makes sense. Anyway, that's not that relevant to this book, but so this is about Karanasi, who lives in this house, and it's just him and then the other, which is like this other person in the house, and he is like a meticulous record keeper. He journals all the time. He has his own system of like timekeeping. He loves the house. It's full of statues, and he goes to visit. He makes like things out of seaweed. There's lots of like, there's like a tide there too that comes every now and again, and he can go fishing, and it's just kind of about his life and you know, him sort of him trying to comprehend his scientific method, I guess, in a way. Yeah, and so I also started reading this in the context of like Susanna Clarke's chronic illness. I'm pretty sure she has ME in my mind, and obviously also my experience of that too. Not of ME, but of chronic illness. So that definitely also affected my reading of it, especially at the beginning. And I did really enjoy that, and I really enjoyed how Karanasi like loves the house and just kind of believes that the house will provide for him in a way that felt quite like, I don't know, sort of chronic illness kind. I don't know, like where you just get to a point of deep acceptance of your body, and even though you know that like the tide's all wrong and you had to create a new system in order to understand what was going on, it's still doing its best for you, and like it will provide what it can for you. I don't think that's like an extended metaphor in this, but it's definitely part of it. And then of course, because of some of the stuff that Karanasi deals with, like memory loss, that's also obviously very relatable. And there's even this point when the other, who's very mean to him, is like, gosh, you know, you're often like late, blah blah blah, and Karanasi's just like, how can I be late? Like, I invented the time. Like, how can I be late? I invented it. Just like, wow, mood. I did still feel kind of underwhelmed by it, or maybe not underwhelmed. I guess I don't know, I thought it was interesting. I think there's some stuff going on about like gender and like queerness that I found like maybe a bit uncomfortable. I think that like one of the main antagonists, who you find out about he's gay, and like his kind of like sordid, awful knowledge seeking, which is transgressive, and he's like a very much transgressive like philosophical thing, feels linked to his gayness, and I guess maybe that was like the point or something. Oh god, there's this cop too that yeah, I don't know, I didn't really like the ending majorly, And then there's also this other woman character who like we get brief snippets of, who sounds like really fascinating, but we don't really, I feel like she had such great potential to really like make the story much more interesting and sort of more wider and deeper, and she's just very removed from the text. You know, maybe she's supposed to be unreachable because she's actually the one who comprehends like knowledge without exploitation and imagination without like power imbalance the most, but I don't know if that is really what Susanna Clark is trying to say there. And I think that like it doesn't do enough thinking about the prison as a space, and also there are some things that like Karanasi kind of like naturalizes because he like suddenly understands them in a way that I really didn't like, and I thought was pretty lazy, to be honest, especially in terms of like the behaviours of like the police and stuff like that. So yeah, my camera battery died, so I just had to charge it, so my hair's definitely drier than it was before, and the lighting is also definitely different. Anyway, the next thing that I read was a short story from, I think it's from When Will It Be Black Future Month? Can't remember the name of the collection, but I'll put a picture here, by N.K. Jemisin, and the story from it I read is like available online, and it's called The Ones Who Stay and Fight. And I thought it was really bad. I just thought it completely, like it's a sort of response to Ursula K. Le Guin's short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is I think what that's called. And I just felt like N.K. Jemisin's response completely didn't understand like the concept of the first short story. Yeah, I don't really know what she was doing. I found out about it through Books by Lanes's wrap-up where she talks about it, because she has read both of them in like quick succession of each other. So I will link that because I think that also gives you some more context of the Ursula K. Le Guin story. But yeah, I just thought it was bad. And it's like, because I watched that, I was like, oh gosh, maybe I do have to read this, because I was like getting annoyed about it just listening, and then I was like, it's not really fair for me to have all of these opinions and not read the short story, so then I did read it. It was bad. Then I finally read Animal Farm by George Orwell. I'm not like a fan of George Orwell, like obviously he's held up as quite like a left-wing person, but he also betrayed like the confidences of some communists to the government and stuff like that, so and you know, I just don't think he's as great as everybody says he is. But I have like been pushed a little bit to read his books by various just like, you know, other books referencing him, and the final straw was a book that was just longlisted for the Booker Prize, Glory, by No Violet Bulawayo, I think, is a sort of, not a retelling, but it uses the model of Animal Farm. That is a farm where the animals come to represent various members of the Russian Revolution. That's Animal Farm. And it uses that kind of framework to tell a story about Zimbabwean politics, I believe. And I thought that sounded really interesting, and then I was kind of like, I guess it's probably better for me if I read Animal Farm so I can kind of get it more when I do read it. I don't expect to read Glory anytime soon, but I do actually have a copy of the first book, I think it was her debut, called like We Need New Names, that was also shortlisted for the Booker maybe like in 2016, I don't know, quite a while ago. So I will try to read that before I read Glory, but yeah, I just suddenly was like, I guess it's maybe just time to read Animal Farm. So yeah, like it was fine. It was interesting to like track on who was supposed to represent who. Obviously my favourite was Old Major, who's a nice pig who dies right at the very beginning and represents Karl Marx. I also thought that like there was definitely, you know, a bunch of misogyny going on there. So I think it's a shame that like Alexandra Kollontai wasn't represented. Anyway, it's like very short, so it you know, I listened to it in like one go. Then I read Money by Victoria Benedictsson, translated by Sarah Death from the Swedish. This is from 1885, and it's just like a novel that I randomly found, and I'm really glad I did, because it was really good, it was really interesting. It felt very kind of subtle and, or I don't know, like complex and big whilst being small. Like it maintains a kind of interest in like small life whilst understanding how important small life is, especially to women. Yeah, and it's just about this girl called Selma Berg and her marriage to this like rich squire. It didn't end how I expected it to end, and in a way that makes me more heartbroken, just because Victoria Benedictsson did end up killing herself. Yeah, there was like some nice gayness in here, like a sapphic energy, you know, again like not massively touched on or anything, but just like one of the main character, Selma, is like, oh, he's awfully nice looking at women, and they have this nice conversation. There is also something about ugliness going on here, and I also really liked how gestures were described in it. Yeah, I don't know, I think it's really great, and it's quite short, and it did take me a while, like it was a bit resistant to me reading it for a while, and maybe that was just because of my mood, but I also do think that like it was a bit difficult to get into. I read like the first couple pages like in April or something, but then I didn't quite like get stuck in until this month when I like tried to read like sort of it chapter by chapter, because it's also quite like contained within those chapters. Like it's not like a short story. I don't think it reads like short stories connected, but it does feel like they are quite contained episodes, I guess, and there are some like large gaps of time, like jumps of time. I'm really glad I read it, and I'm really glad I just randomly stumbled across it, and yeah, I'm excited to read more Scandinavian literature from like this era, you know, like classic books. I mean, as well, obviously that's not to say I'm not interested in reading like contemporary books, but just like this is obviously my interest. Like this really speaks to like a lot of what I am intrigued about, like marriage, I guess to some degree, like free love, gender relations, class, money, material feminism. Then I read another book in translation and that's The Memory of Babel by Christelle Dabo, which is the third book in the Mirror Visitor series. I won't tell you what it's about because it is the third book. I don't even really want to describe like what happens because yeah, so much happens in these books. But obviously I will say that like this is like a classic kind of sequel to a series, or like an addition, because it really like expands the world, which is something that has been happening like steadily more and more, wider and wider with each book, but this one takes that massively wider, I would say. I really enjoyed parts of this, but I also really disliked quite a lot of it, and that's because the descriptions of characters and I guess kind of like the way that they're imagined to exist within the world was very racist. So like there's this character called, I think she's called Zen, and she is described I think almost every single time as a porcelain doll. She has almond shaped eyes. I mean, all of these like very like textbook orientalist racist stereotypes to describe her, and she isn't like a main character, so she was only kind of in there for a little bit, but almost every time she's described as this like doll, which is obviously awful. And then there is like such an expanding of the world that we get a kind of list of these other worlds or these other arcs. You know, there's like Anima, which is the arc where Ophelia, the main character, she's from. That's where the book starts, like the series starts, sorry. But yeah, we learn a bit more. There are people called totemists who control like animals, I think. I mean, we don't get very much information about them aside from that, but we do get to learn that they're all like dark-skinned black people, and I just feel like that was also like a racist choice, because like the author clearly sees like a connection between dark-skinned people like with animals, and again that kind of idea is a racist one that's been around for ages. And then of course like calling them totem also makes me pretty uncomfortable. Some of that, you know, might be just because of the translation, as in like it can be difficult, especially maybe in terms of things like that are kind of culturally signified in ways, so like words relating to disability, I definitely found in this book, and also race. Obviously there are like some different contexts culturally, nationally, that kind of thing that will come with that. So translating a book like this from French to English, like maybe some of it is a bit lost in translation or sounds worse in translation than in the original, but you know, only to some degree. Like, and on top of the fact that like it feels very French, like the way that this is very fast and loose with like other cultures and racial signifiers and like oppressive, like sexualizing ideas about racialized people. If this was the second book in the series, definitely if this was the first book in the series, I wouldn't keep reading, but because I am so close and I do want to know what happens, and there is a way that I do like how kind of like casual a lot of the like non-normative bodily stuff is in this book series. I like that, and I like how like kind of, yeah, like it feels like rompy in a way that can be fun. Of course then I think there's obviously a line there and it definitely gets disrespectful, but yeah, because I do like that approach, and I do like the world, and I like Ophelia, and I like how this is YA but it doesn't conform to a lot of the like YA stuff that is often in YA fantasy. Because also Ophelia is quite a bit older. I think at this point she must be at least 22 if not older, because I'm pretty sure she starts the series at age 19. Yeah, anyway, so I got lost what I was saying, but so I will be reading the next book, but yeah, if I were to start with this, I definitely wouldn't. And I really hope that it gets better in the next book. Yeah, so I am filming this, there's one more day left of July, and I have started reading Bid Me to Live by HD, which is a book that I picked from my TBR jar. I'm not very far into it, but it is pretty short. It's like got pretty large font and it's about 195 pages. I also have The Lie Tree, which was from my TBR jar, Money, which was from my TBR jar, and The Memory of Babel, which was from my TBR jar as well. Oh, I didn't say, this was translated by Hildegard Searle who has translated the other books too. Yeah, so let me know what you think about any of the books I mentioned, if you're interested in reading them, and how your July reading was, and I hope you're having a nice day. And I hope you have a nice day when you're watching this, and yeah, I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!